Two men driving through a remote trail spot something massive lying in the grass. A wounded grizzly bear, barely breathing, blocking the road. Most people would have kept driving, but they didn't. They stepped out. They got closer. And when they reached her side and looked beneath her body, what they saw made both men scream. What began as an ordinary rescue would turn into a heart-wrenching story of survival, instinct, and sacrifice that no one could have imagined. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This story will challenge what you believe about animals and about love. It was supposed to be a short detour. Jason and Miguel, two Park Service contractors, were scouting a fire road near Flathead National Forest for erosion damage. The sun was just dipping below the tree line, and they'd promised their supervisor they'd be back before dark. But as their truck rounded a tight bend, the headlights swept over something lying across the gravel trail. Miguel hit the brakes hard. Jason grabbed the dashboard. And then, silence. "What is that?" Jason asked, squinting through the glass. Miguel leaned forward. "Bear. A big one." They both stepped out slowly, boots crunching on the gravel. The light from the truck illuminated the massive shape, a grizzly bear lying on her side, motionless. Her chest barely moved. Her fur was thick with dust and streaked with something dark. "Blood. Is she dead?" Jason whispered. Miguel crouched slowly, keeping a few yards of distance. "No. She's breathing. But she's hurt." Jason stepped beside him. "She's not growling. Not even moving." Miguel pointed to her back leg. "A gash, deep and raw. She's been hit. Maybe a poacher. Maybe a trap. Or maybe she got into a fight." Jason was already reaching for the radio. No signal. They stood frozen for a moment, hearts racing. Everything they knew about bears said, "Don't get close." But something was wrong. Deeply wrong. She wasn't aggressive. She wasn't even alert. She was shielding something. Miguel motioned with his chin. "Look under her. Do you see?" Jason stepped to the side, adjusting his angle. He froze, then stumbled back, hand over his mouth. "Oh my God." There, tucked beneath the bear's massive torso, barely visible under her forearm, was movement. Small. Shivering. A cub. No, two. Their eyes were open. One was mewing softly. The other clung to its sibling like a lifeline. "She's protecting them," Miguel said, voice low. Jason looked down again. The mother grizzly had collapsed over her own cubs to shield them from whatever had hurt her. And now, she was dying, quietly, silently, so her babies could live. "We can't leave them," Jason said. Miguel nodded, already pulling a tarp from the truck. But neither of them had done this before. They were contractors, not rescue, not animal control, and certainly not bear handlers. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was a mother who gave her body to protect her young, and two lives still breathing beneath her. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, the forest grew quiet, and two men knelt beside a dying giant, uncertain of what came next, but absolutely certain they weren't walking away. The mother grizzly still hadn't moved. Jason crouched down again, careful to stay just outside her reach. Her breathing was shallow and uneven, like someone inhaling through broken glass. Her eyes were half closed. She knew they were there, but she made no sound, no growl, no show of teeth. Just that steady, agonizing breath. "She's not going to last much longer," Miguel said quietly. Jason nodded. We need to get the cubs out. Miguel hesitated. And what if she wakes up? Jason looked at her, then at the cubs, both pressed tight against her chest, shaking. We take the chance. They moved slow, deliberately. Miguel held the flashlight while Jason edged closer, speaking softly. He didn't know why he talked to her. The bear couldn't understand his words, but something told him it mattered. You're not alone, girl, he murmured. We're here now. Jason reached out and gently touched the edge of her fur. The cubs stirred but didn't flee. The one closest to him, slightly bigger, turned its face toward the light. Wet eyes. Dirt-streaked fur. Ears twitching from exhaustion. Jason slid one arm under the cub's belly. The bear didn't react. He lifted it, slowly, gently, like a newborn. The cub whimpered. Miguel held his breath. But the mother didn't move. They placed the first cub on the tarp a few feet away. Jason went back for the second. This one was weaker, barely moved as he scooped it up. And as he lifted it, the mother grizzly finally made a sound. A low, soft rumble. Jason froze. The sound wasn't a threat. It was a goodbye. Jason stepped back, heart pounding, and laid the second cub beside the first. Miguel quickly wrapped the tarp edges around them, cradling both like a bundle. When they looked back, the grizzly's eyes were closed, and her chest no longer moved. She was gone. Miguel took off his cap. Jason stood still for a long time, staring at the shape in the dirt, this mountain of strength that had spent her final breath sheltering what mattered most. Then he spoke, voice cracking. She saved them. Back at the truck, they cleared space in the back seat and layered old blankets for warmth. Miguel placed the bundle down gently. One of the cubs licked the other's ear, then curled tighter. We need to call someone, Jason said. Ranger, rehab, I don't care who. No signal, Miguel reminded him. We need to drive. Jason looked at the clock on the dash. They were hours from the nearest wildlife outpost. But they had no other choice. He started the engine. The headlights carved through the trees as the truck bounced back down the trail. Jason gripped the wheel tight, eyes locked on the road. In the mirror, he could see the cubs shifting under the blanket. He didn't know if they'd survive the night, but they had survived her death. And that had to count for something. The forest swallowed their tail lights as they drove. Miguel leaned forward in the passenger seat, glancing every few seconds into the back where the cubs lay bundled under the tarp. One was moving slowly, restlessly nudging the other with its nose. The smaller cub hadn't moved at all. Jason's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles had gone white. We're not going to make the ranger station before midnight, Miguel said. Jason didn't answer. A sharp bump jolted the truck as they turned off the fire road and hit pavement again. I know a vet, Jason finally muttered, friend of my brother's. She's not wildlife certified, but she won't ask questions. Miguel nodded. You sure? No. They reached the small town of Troy just after 11 p.m. The lights were mostly out, the kind of town where everything sleeps early and wakes with the sun. Jason pulled up to an old one-story building next to a shuttered clinic with a fading sign, Dr. Hall Veterinary Care. He killed the engine and stepped out into the cold. Miguel followed, gently lifting the tarp-wrapped cubs in his arms. One of them let out a faint whimper, a sound so soft it could have been mistaken for wind. Claire Hall answered the door in slippers and a flannel robe. She looked from Jason to the bundle, then back to Jason. You brought me trouble, she said quietly. Yeah, he replied, but not the kind that can wait until morning. Claire moved fast, unlocking the exam room, flipping on lights, laying out towels and supplies. The cubs were placed gently on the table. She examined the smaller one first, severely dehydrated, weak heartbeat, hypothermic. Jason took a step back, he couldn't stop staring. Claire looked at him. You okay? He didn't answer. Miguel answered for him. His brother died last year, he said softly. Car accident. Left behind a baby girl just 6 weeks old. Jason was there when it happened. Claire's hands paused. Jason looked away. The smaller cub let out a sudden sharp wheeze and then nothing. Claire jumped into action, a heat pad, for drip, a steady hand. I'm not losing him, she said. Not tonight. Jason sat in the corner, fists on his knees, heart racing. It was too familiar, too raw, watching something small and helpless fade while the world stayed indifferent. Hours passed in silence. Claire worked without rest. Finally, just before dawn, she stepped away from the table and whispered, "He's stable for now." Miguel let out a long breath. Jason stood, legs stiff. The cubs were curled together again, both breathing. Outside, the sun began to lift over the ridgeline. The night was behind them, but the hardest part was still ahead. The cubs slept most of the morning. Claire gave them glucose, fluids, and time. The smaller one, whom Jason had started calling Pip, still shivered in his sleep, but his breathing held steady. The bigger one, Birch, Miguel had named him, clung to his brother like a shadow, never more than inches away. Jason hadn't moved from the chair in the corner, not for hours. Claire stepped into the room with a warm compress in hand and paused at the doorway. "You're not just doing this for them," she said gently. Jason didn't look up. "I couldn't help my brother. I didn't know how to save him. But these two, I can help them." Claire placed the compress on Pip's side, then reached for the file Miguel had started building. She froze, then leaned in closer. "There's a scar," she said. Jason got up. "What kind of scar?" "Not an injury, a mark." "Hold on." She reached for a small scanner from the supply closet and waved it carefully over Pip's left shoulder blade. A beep. Then a number appeared on the screen. Claire's face darkened. He was tagged. Jason blinked. "What do you mean?" "This cub was part of a wildlife study. GPS tracker. That means he had a mother in the system." She looked closer at the larger cub. Both of them did. Claire turned to her old laptop and pulled up the regional wildlife database. It took a few minutes, but eventually the numbers matched. Grizzly number 872F, female, known den location Granite Ridge, 2 cubs confirmed, last transmission 2 weeks ago. Then another entry, status signal lost, presumed deceased. Jason's jaw tightened. That was her. Miguel nodded slowly. The mother on the road. Jason stepped outside, overwhelmed. The crisp morning air hit his lungs like ice. He paced along the sidewalk, fists clenched, not just rage, not just grief, guilt. Someone had tagged this bear, watched her, knew where she was, and still no one came when she needed help. How many days had she shielded her cubs alone? Claire joined him outside. She probably fled her den when injured, found that spot on the fire road, and collapsed there. That's the only reason you found them. Jason shook his head. She crawled out to die where someone might see her. She didn't give up. Claire placed a hand on his shoulder. She didn't. And now they have a chance. Later that afternoon, an unmarked truck pulled into the clinic parking lot. A man stepped out wearing plain forest ranger gear, clipboard in hand. His badge read Life Division Enforcement. "I'm looking for the grizzly cubs rescued on Flathead Road," he said. Jason stepped between him and the clinic door. "We're taking care of them." The officer didn't blink. "And I need to evaluate if they're meant to be taken care of." Inside, the cubs stirred. The bond that had saved them was real. But the law didn't always understand love. Jason stood his ground in front of the clinic door, eyes locked with the officer. "I'm not here to fight you," the man said calmly. "My name's Ranger Lyle. My job is to assess threats, health risks, and policy violations. These cubs fall under federal protection." "They're not in danger," Jason said, his voice firm. "They're safe. We saved them." "Not the point," Lyle replied. "They're still wild. They belong to the ecosystem, not to us." Miguel stepped out behind Jason, arms crossed. "And if we hadn't stepped in, they'd be dead." Lyle sighed, not unkindly. "I don't doubt that, but protocol exists for a reason." Inside the exam room, Claire was cleaning Pip's foreline. She kept her tone neutral when Lyle entered. "Cubs are stable, malnourished, dehydrated, but no infections. They were close to organ failure. They need weeks of observation, not transport. If you try to relocate them now, you'll lose them." Lyle took notes, didn't interrupt. Then he looked at the cubs. They were asleep again. Burr had his head draped over Pip's back. Their breathing matched like synchronized waves. "You've named them," Lyle said. Claire didn't answer. Back in the hallway, Jason's frustration boiled. "You come here, talk about policy, and don't even ask how we found them. You didn't see their mother. Didn't see what she did to keep them alive." Lyle was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something Jason didn't expect. "My brother died last winter alone in his truck. Took hours before anyone found him. I know what it means when no one shows up." Jason's anger cracked. Lyle continued, softer now. "These two, they're alive because of people who did show up, and that matters." Jason exhaled. "So now what?" Lyle looked down at his clipboard, then tucked it under his arm. "There's a sanctuary upstate, not open to the public. No cages. Reintroduction program with other orphaned cubs. If you're willing to transfer custody temporarily, we can get them approved. You'll stay on as volunteer handlers." Miguel stepped forward. "We keep seeing them if they thrive." Lyle nodded. "Yes." Claire looked between them. "It's the only way they'll make it to adulthood." Jason stared at the cubs. Birch stirred slightly in his sleep, paw twitching, mouth smacking softly as if dreaming. "Okay," Jason said, "but I'm going with them." Lyle nodded. "Then start packing." Later that night, Jason sat beside the cubs one last time in the clinic. He whispered, "You didn't get to choose any of this, but I did. I chose you." The cubs didn't wake, but one of them stretched, paw resting just barely against Jason's hand on the edge of the blanket. He stayed like that until morning. The truck was loaded before sunrise. 2 modified crates sat side by side in the back seat, padded with thick straw and fleece blankets. Birch was alert, snout poking through the wire door, eyes scanning everything. Pip slept curled into a tight ball, still fragile but stable. Jason climbed into the passenger seat beside Ranger. Lyle and Miguel handed him a small cooler. "Snacks for you and the cubs." Jason gave a faint smile. Don't make me cry before we even leave. Miguel stepped back, looked at the truck, then at Jason. Tell them their mom would have been proud. The road out of town was quiet. Forests blurred past the windows in green and gold. Mountains loomed in the distance like silent guardians. Jason kept glancing over his shoulder, checking on the crates, whispering soft reassurances. You're okay. We're almost there. Pip stirred once. Burr huffed as if answering. Lyle broke the silence after an hour. Why them? Jason looked over. What do you mean? You've worked rescue jobs before. Why these two? Jason stared out the window. Because when I saw them under her, I saw my niece. Lyle's eyes flicked toward him, surprised. Jason continued. She's 4 now. My brother didn't make it out of the crash, but she survived tucked under his arm. When they found them, the EMT said the seatbelt failed, but somehow she was untouched. He exhaled. She doesn't remember, but I do. The rest of the ride was quiet, but it wasn't empty. They arrived at the sanctuary just after midday. It wasn't a facility. It was land, rolling hills fenced only in name, no concrete, no cages in sight. The air smelled like pine and earth and clean water. 2 handlers approached slowly, calm, practiced. One of them, a woman named Natalie, placed her hand gently on the crate. Welcome home, little ones. Jason opened Birch's crate first. The cubs stepped out cautiously, sniffed the grass, then padded forward into the open space. Pip followed slowly, staying close, ears twitching. They didn't bolt. They didn't cry. They just moved like something ancient in them recognized freedom. Jason stayed behind the fence, hands gripped tight to the top rail. Natalie turned to him. You can visit them during transition, but once they start bonding with the others. I know, Jason said. She smiled. It's working. They trust the world again. Before leaving, Jason placed something just inside the gate, a folded towel from Claire's clinic. And inside it, his glove. Burr's favorite. Natalie watched silently, then nodded once. They'll remember. Back in the truck, Jason didn't speak. He stared out the window for miles, and then finally, as the sun began to set behind the hills, he said. They were never mine to keep, just mine to carry for a while. Lyle nodded and drove. 6 weeks later, Jason stood once again at the edge of the sanctuary. The cubs had changed. Birch was nearly unrecognizable, stronger, faster, his shoulders broader, his fur thick and clean. He ran now with other cubs across the meadow, climbing over logs and splashing through shallow creeks. Pip, still smaller, had learned to hold his own, more cautious, but not afraid. He no longer trembled when staff approached. He didn't need the blankets anymore. Jason stood quietly behind the viewing fence, hands in his jacket pockets, watching them from a distance. Birch glanced toward him once, paused, and then went back to playing. Natalie stepped up beside him. He's weaning off the glove, she said with a smile. He carries it less now. Jason nodded. They're doing better than I ever imagined. You helped give them that chance. He looked down at his boots. I still see her sometimes, the mother. The way she wrapped herself over them. Natalie's voice softened. That's not something you forget. That evening, Jason walked alone to the overlook. He sat on the flat rock where he'd left the towel and glove. The towel was gone, taken apart for nesting most likely, but the glove remained, faded, dirt-stained, and chewed at the fingertips. He didn't pick it up. He didn't need to. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small wooden carving, 2 tiny cubs beneath the arching form of a bear. He'd been working on it for weeks, carving by firelight, sanding the edges smooth. He placed it on the rock, not a memorial, a thank you. Before he turned to leave, he whispered aloud, "They're okay. You did it. They're okay." And as he walked away, a light breeze carried through the trees, a rustle, a low hum. And though there was no sign, no movement behind him, Jason smiled. Because some bonds don't need words, and some love stories don't end with holding on. They end with letting go. If this story touched you, remember, sometimes the quietest sacrifices leave the loudest echoes. If a mother bear can teach us to give everything to protect what we love, maybe we can too. Subscribe, like, and share this story with someone who believes in second chances and in love that doesn't give up.